Doctors and surgeons of Reddit, what was your this just got even worse moment with your patient? I hope I never effing see this again. I'm an Abjin resident. This happened when I was a student. 300-pound African American female with IVF twins around 32 weeks gestation. Multiple medical problems. Chronic hypertension. Being monitored inpatient. AMM rounds. She looks uncomfortable. Said she slept in a chair. Just looked very anxious for no reason. Breathing heavy. Blood pressure is very high. We give meds. We can only get one twin's heart. Probably because she's so big. We move her to L&D for closer monitoring. Plus ready access to ultrasound. Now she has a lot of abdominal pain. Blood pressure still very high. Her breathing is getting heavier. Stat chest x-ray shows her lungs are like completely whited out, filling with fluid from flash pulmonary edema. At the same time her abdominal pain is worse and worse. Big bright red clot falls out of her vagina. Same time, we get her ultrasound view of both fetuses. Twin 2's heart is super slow. Patient is now having a panic attack and screaming while also having trouble breathing. This is all within like 10 minutes. Stat emergency crash C-section. Get her on the table. She starts having an eclamptic seizure. Anesthesia does rapid sequence intubation. Loud, long, steady, beep. Patient goes into cardiac arrest on the table. Code blue. Labor and delivery goes out overhead throughout the hospital. Phones all over the floor start blowing up. White coats and scrubs sprinting onto the floor. ICU comes running. Rapid response team comes running. General surgery comes running. A double NICU team comes running. There's like 30 people in the OR. ICU is giving chest compressions and running the code. Surgery is putting in a central line. Rapid response is setting up to shock. Obgyn is doing the C-section. I remember the attending yell, cut, cut, cut. Obgyn goes skin to baby number 1 in about 54 seconds. There's blood everywhere. Compression still going while operating. Second baby comes out very still looking. Placental abruption. The high blood pressure flooded her lungs and tore the placenta off the uterus. NICU takes both babies. They eventually do just fine as far as hospital course goes. Mom achieves ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation. Her heart is beating on its own now, still bleeding. Massive transfusion protocol initiated. She eventually gets somewhere between 14 and 20 units of packed red blood cells plus plasma, platelets, other stuff. Thank you for giving blood. It actually actively saves the lives of people who wish they could know who to thank. Conservative surgical measures don't stop the bleeding. Cavalier uterus is diagnosed secondary to placental abruption in the setting of eclamptic seizure. Caesarean hysterectomy is performed. Uterus comes out. Patient remains intubated for about 2 days. Downgraded from SICU. Walks out of the goddamn hospital after 1 week because that's how a solid medical team handles this Now, there were a lot of red flags to indicate delivery at the beginning of this story, but she spiraled so fast. There really wasn't any significant wasted time. I have many stories. One is a healthy 23-year-old male comes into ER with some chest pain. Normal vital signs. Never smoker. Normal chest x-ray. Pain started after eating something spicy. Tell him it's probably GERD. 5 minutes later he drops dead in his bed. Start CPR and get a pulse back. Stabilized. Gets CT scan and has an aortic dissection. Dies again in CT scan and never makes it to the OR. The guy's major blood vessel basically just exploded. This happens to men in their 70s with a long smoking history and high blood pressure. This healthy 23-year-old had absolutely zero risk factors for this. No evidence of Marfan's or Ehlers-Danlos for the med people reading this. Still makes no sense to me. My father went to hospital with chest pains. They decided to do an angiogram. Dye injected. He's lying under the machine and the surgeon suddenly changes his procedure. "Are you okay, feeling well? Any blackouts?" "No," he replied, "just pain." A few more docs come in and are looking at the screen. They take him to another type of x-ray machine and again are looking in bemusement without explaining anything. "You have a blood clot the size of a golf ball floating free in your heart. It's bouncing around the valves and we would expect you to have died very quickly from this." So they give him super strong clot busters, but were concerned it might shrink enough to get jammed. A lot of experts turned up, but all went well and he had a triple bypass a few months later. That was 30 years ago. He's 87 now and can walk with ease up at pills. Eye doctor here. You may have heard that diabetics need to have their eyes checked regularly because diabetes is actually a blinding condition. This happened probably about 15 years ago, but this patient of mine I had noted had severe diabetic vascular changes against the retina and required laser intervention as soon as possible. Without getting into the socio-economic arguments here, she scheduled her surgery and on the day of the surgery decided to take a work day instead of her surgery. Her job was cleaning, and on that fateful day, she inhaled some of her cleaner fumes which caused her to sneeze, spiking her blood pressure, and she blew the fragile blood vessels in both of her eyes wide open and blood started gushing into her eyes. As you might imagine, blood is opaque, you can't see through it. She was instantly and completely blinded in both eyes in a matter of seconds. It took 3 years, multiple surgeries, and a complete lifestyle change. But this patient did recover to have actually fair, but not good, vision. I still see her now for her annual visits. I am not a doctor or surgeon, but I did work in healthcare and this was in an urgent care setting. Should have been an ER visit though. I was assessing and taking information down for a 25-day-old newborn. The parents were very young and concerned that the baby wouldn't stop crying and never settled. I tried to calm them and reassure them we see this a lot. Baby seemed a bit feverish and red, so I took temp and it was slightly elevated. You definitely don't want a newborn so young with a fever, but sometimes it's not very serious. I noticed one leg appeared possibly clubbed with a foot, but that was not what they were there for. The doctor returned after seeing them and said baby was going to radiology right away. That's not good. X-rays come back and it's realized the one leg that appeared off to me was actually a broken femur. The doctor described it as, the only possible way for this to happen was someone had to have grabbed it and twisted hard. Suddenly we are making a temporary cast to splint this tiny, not much bigger than a bratwurst-sized thigh and loading the car seat on a stretcher for transport. Police arrive, and the grandma came crashing through the doors screaming at these parents about how she's going to kill them for hurting her grandbaby. It was a little chaotic, but very depressing. It was long ago, but I still wonder about that one. A little late to the party, but I'll chime in. When I was a medical student on my surgery rotation, I was working a 24 and was with the trauma team. I'm observing a simple repair of a duodenal perforation in the OR when my trauma pager goes off. Ask my senior if I can leave to see what's going on and he gives me the go ahead. Run into the trauma bay and a youngish gentleman is brought in on a stretcher with the lower half of his body covered in blood, but very obviously awake and coherent. He's screaming, "They shot my balls. They shot my effing balls, man." And he had been shot 15 times all below the belt, one of which had gone straight through his scrotum. We're doing an evaluation on this distraught man when a code is called in the next pod over in the ED. That's weird, they usually don't call overhead for codes in the ED. Someone pops their head into the trauma bay. It's the patient who was brought in with this guy. OF. Several of us run away from stable scrotum shot guy and into the next pod to see a young woman lying on a stretcher receiving CPR. What happened? We don't know, she just crashed. Go to roll the patient to get her clothes off and we notice she's bleeding out of her back out of the tiniest exit wound. She was an unintended victim of the drive-by. She's now our patient. We take her to the trauma bay and immediately take off all her clothes to perform the primary surgery. She's not breathing and has no pulse intubate. Sure as once we get her entirely exposed we see a very small entry wound right into the center of her chest. Ultrasound confirms massive hemothorax. Place a chest tube and 2 liters of blood gush out onto the floor. OF. We need to convert to open, says my attending resident I'm with. Immediately takes a scalpel and creates a longitudinal incision along the inferior aspect of the rib spaces and uses a pair of medical gardening shears to clip the sternum in half. Basically, the patient has had their chest pried open horizontally in a crazy procedure called a clamshell thoracotomy. Look it up. At this point we can visualize the heart and notice there was a clean entry and exit wound straight through this patient's heart. All of the blood and fluids we were pushing were just draining right out of her heart and into her chest. Surgical attending is performing manual cardiac massage, CPR with your hands on the actual heart. We need to go to the OR. Rush down to the OR with this patient and the attending attempts to sew up the holes in her heart. Just as she's putting the final sutures into the patient, I begin to notice the patient using blood from every single opening in her body. Doc, I think this patient is indic. OF. Patient is now floridly experiencing a phenomenon known as disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, DIC, which is basically when you use up all of your clotting agents and just bleed out of everywhere. Okay, we need to close for now. Patient is transferred to the SICU where I monitor her progress for 3 effing weeks. She has watershed infarctions across her entire brain from how long it went without perfusion. She can't talk or move, having end-of-life discussions with the family about a young woman who isn't even old enough to drink. I leave the service and follow her until one day I don't see her name anymore. Next day I'm in a surgery with a trauma attending and she says, hey, our shooting patient went home today. She's a quadriplegic, but she's alive. That sucks. I respond. Fast forward 6 months and I'm working in the SICU again. I bring up this patient to a neurointensivist attending because I think it's a cool story. Her eyes opened so wide. I saw that patient in the ICU and told the family she was going to die. When she didn't die, I told them she would be a quad. Then a month ago I had a follow-up visit with her and she walked into my clinic with nothing to show for her experience except a scar from her thoracotomy. Nurse here. Midwife let a mom go through over 8 hours of the pushing stage of birth to the point the mom went into severe decompensation, blood pressure plummets, saturation drops, fetal distress, etc. In Canada, midwives practice separately from doctors and nurses. They usually just have an agreement with hospitals to use the beds. Although medical care is available if the delivery becomes high risk, doctors take over and go in for emergency C-section. Realize the arteries in the sides of the uterus are ruptured due to pulling away from the strained uterus and extensive pushing. Baby came out fine, but they had to work on mom. Finally close her up only for mom's pressure to plummet again. They open her back up and realize another artery was bleeding, so they clamped her aorta until they could repair the damage. That is, her lower body didn't receive blood flow for several minutes. They replaced her blood volume at least 3 times throughout. Finally the team stabilized her but were afraid of anything else unexpected, so they packed her but left the wound open. Then sent her to ICU. I received baby in NICU. Baby was okay. Mom survived, although didn't find out much more.